this first afternoon session after the break, we've decided to completely throw out what we were going to do and do something different, which I think is going to work out really, really well, given everything that we've heard today. It's been quite the day, and I think that there's nobody better to help us through what we've heard than the three people right there. They are all part of different sexual assault centers in Ontario. They're all incredibly wonderful people. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they know what they want to say about themselves. So to start off, we're going to start off with Jessica, and you go right ahead.
Thank you. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. My name is Jessica Bonilla-Damptey. My pronouns are ella, she, her. I am from Hamilton, Dishes One Spoon territory. I'm with the Sexual Assault Center of Hamilton and area. I'm the executive director there. What can I say? I'm a mom of two beautiful boys, Antonio, who's 11, and Itzai, who's 7. I have five now, because we just had a baby in the family, 5 nieces and nephews. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here and sharing space with you all. Along with being the director at SASHA, I'm on the executive of the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers, the Hamilton Anti-Human Trafficking Steering Committee, as well as I'm the co-chair of the Women Abuse Working Group. That's my day job, and by night, I do community work too. And lots of that community work looks like being in spaces like this, with panels like this, where we improvise and we go with what needs to be done so that community is safe, community is well, and that we're all grounded together. So part of my grounding right now is appreciating this beautiful bear we all got, or most of us have, and
there are more bears.
There are more bears, and I've been promised the one with a different color shirt, which is really exciting. But appreciating that these are our tools for our well-being. They're toys, and as adults, sometimes we don't let ourselves play, or we think we shouldn't be playing, but this little teddy bear is like a fidget toy for me, just to have and hold on to while I'm up here on stage. I also have my pen that I always do this before I knew fidgeting was a thing. I just click top of my pen. And why do I say that? I say that because that's the way that I keep myself well in presentations, but also with difficult conversations. I'm gonna pass it on to my colleague. Oh, you've got a mic.
Yeah. I think I have my own.
Fancy.
Yeah. My name is Lyndsey Butcher. My pronouns are she and her. I work as the Director of Services at the Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region, so we're about an hour and a half from here. In my role, I oversee all of the care and support that we provide to survivors. And so our center is probably one of the largest independent sexual assault support centers in Ontario, if not in the country. We provide a number of services. We have our 24-hour support line, like at all of our centers. We have online chat. We have free trauma counseling, a human trafficking program, family court support. We have a fantastic legal advocate program that supports survivors from before they report to police, while they report to police, through the criminal justice process, and afterwards if they have complaints. And Diane is here with me today, our legal advocate. Really important work, but listening to the stories today really hits home how critical grassroots, community-based, independent sexual assault support centers are in ensuring that the voices and needs of survivors come first. So we're very proud of the work that we offer. I know that today has been really heavy, and so as a panel, we've sort of come together and said, let's make some space for just processing what folks have heard. So we're just going to start with our intro and then move on from there. For me, grounding is getting some water. And so it helps me to just even physically cool down, to calm myself, to recenter myself when you are starting to feel those big feelings. So for me, grounding is, getting something to eat, getting some cold water to help just sort of recenter myself.
I'm Jackie. I work at the Sexual Assault Center at Guelph Wellington Women in Crisis. So we cover the city of Guelph and the county of Wellington. Besides the Sexual Assault Center, we have an emergency shelter that has 28 beds for women and children in our community. We also have a transitional and housing support program that provides support for survivors, victims of domestic violence. They do safety planning, they can do special priority housing, and they can do counseling. We also have a family court support program, and they provide support for survivors navigating the family court system. We have one full-time counselor that does human trafficking or sex trafficking, and that program we can't keep up. It is a big problem in our community, as it is in Ontario. We have a crisis line as well. We have rural women's support program that provides support in our rural areas. And I'm so glad to be here on this panel and to be with all of you. And it gives me hope to be here, to know that there is not just a room full of people here doing this work, but hopefully from here we just keep going. Lots to be done, and we just keep going.
I forgot to talk about my center, I'm sorry. So at Sasha, like my colleagues here have mentioned, we have our 24-hour crisis support line. That's actually how we started as a sexual assault center in Hamilton. Survivors and allies, almost 50 years ago, 50 years in 2025, came together and said, there are survivors here and there is no supports for survivors, what can we do? And so they applied for a $5,000 grant and bought the very first answering machine. And the answering machine was the way that survivors are able to reach out for support. And from there we've expanded. So now we have our counseling services, our sex trafficking survivor counseling program as well, which is our newest program, our diverse communities outreach program, which is an amazing way to reach out to various individuals in communities, newcomers, immigrant refugees, women, gender diverse individuals. We have a sewing program through there where we can have difficult conversations while focusing on sewing and learning how to sew and sharing our collective stories. We also have our public education program, which I think the theme throughout today is that we need more of that public education, which is also known in grant writing language abuse prevention programs, so that we have those teachings for all of us as adults, for our senior adults, as well as for children, how abuse prevention or consent awareness and building those healthy relationships really have to start off as a foundation, right? What does consent look like when you're a child? Do you have to hug grandma? Do you have to hug grandpa, right? Do you have to listen to mommy and daddy when they say go off and be as somebody shared today, as I think his name was Mark, go off and work with the priest. Can you say no to your parents? Can you say no to your family? And what does safety look like for you? So I think all of us do that work. And again, I want to shout out our colleagues who are also in the room, Maria and Grisel, and 3 incredible placement students who are doing this work too in community here in Toronto, through the Toronto Rape Crisis Center, Multicultural Women Against Rape. I don't have the support line again here, but if you're from Toronto, call them for support after today, because it's been a really heavy day. And that's what we want to focus on today. Who wants to talk? Who wants to share something? Recognizing that you don't have to disclose anything. If you want to make a big disclosure, please feel free to call that crisis support line anywhere in Ontario or here in Toronto. But how can we support is what we want to know. Yeah.
I guess I had this question come up earlier when Rick was speaking, and we had a question in the audience around how do you come forward in a timely way if you still need to stay in school, or maybe you're doing your master's or PhD and you have a supervisor that's going to be maybe giving a reference. It's really hard to say, like, hey, do you think you could stop doing that before it gets worse, or maybe not quit your job? It's just kind of hard to keep going before things get worse. I don't know if you can relate it to maybe the idea of being a student, and nobody really wants to create a lot of noise around something that could be dealt with if the measures are in place, but often it's not something that you get rewarded for when you do come forward with something and create some boundaries. We keep talking about boundaries, but people don't always react very well to boundaries, unfortunately.
I can start, and then we can all support with the answer. I think first and foremost, I heard you say, how do I come forward in a timely way? And I'm going to say time isn't linear. We're in a room full of lawyers. Is there a statute of limitations on reporting sexual assault?
No.
None. So the best time is when it's the best time for you as a survivor to come forward when you are ready as a survivor, either to receive supports for yourself, even just to call a crisis line and say, you know what, this happened to me. Or not even this happened to me. I have some questions, hypothetically, what would that happen? So the best time for a survivor to do anything is on their own terms and when they're ready to do so. And I believe that all of us at the sexual assault centers in Ontario and at the OCRCC offer that survivor-centered, survivor-led, trauma-informed approach, anti-racist and anti-oppressive approach that lets survivors know that they are the leaders of their healing, as well as the leaders in what next steps are, and we're there to offer options and support throughout the process.
And through reaching out to either our support line or into our counseling program, something that folks at our centers help survivors with is sort of exploring what those options look like. And so we all have relationships with the post-secondary institutions in our community. Many of us, we have counselors on site at the University of Waterloo, at Wilfrid Laurier University. We also work with Conestoga College to support those students when they do have complaints. And so we don't work for the university, we're independent, but we do support students in exploring what are those options looking like, and we can find confidential ways for people to take those steps. So it's really about exploring and seeing what you're comfortable with, knowing what the risks are, right? And I think sometimes people will say like, oh, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she report? There's lots of good reasons why. Lots of good reasons why.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that, there's usually sexual violence coordinators at the universities, so connect with them. Sometimes I've had somebody come in and say, okay, I'm ready, and then change their mind, and that's okay. So if they need to come back, 6 months, a year later, that's okay.
If nobody else, I actually do have a question. So I think there's some survivors in the room, but there's, I think, a bunch of helpers and supporters and allies in the room as well. And we have heard a lot of heavy content today. So Rick shared a number of stories. We've heard at least 2 survivor stories today. And I know Emma came and talked about the recovery process, but I don't know that anyone's really addressed the topic of vicarious trauma right now. So what is your suggestion for if you're experiencing trauma as a result of being an ally or a helper? What can you do to take care of yourself and hopefully to be able to keep doing that work?
I would say vicarious trauma is real, to different levels and different extents. Being in this room, we've witnessed trauma, and we can also feel that vicarious trauma, the impacts of this trauma later. And so I'm gonna keep saying, call the crisis lines, call the crisis support lines. They're called crisis support lines for a reason. You can call because you're in crisis or because you need support or you have a question. And they're available for survivors, for allies, for helping professionals, as I said. Just call, speak with either a staff member or a very trained volunteer, because I know all of our centers take our training very, very seriously, and our volunteers are well equipped to handle these phone calls. Call and just say, you know what, I was sitting today and this story was shared and now I'm feeling feelings, I don't know what to do with it, or I just want to get it out and have someone else here because I know I can't share this necessarily with my family, right? So these volunteers and these support lines are there for that purpose.
One thing I'll add, at our center, every member of our team, as part of their onboarding, does a vicarious trauma plan with their manager. And they're updated at annual review time. And so through that plan, we go through what are their sort of like pre-existing sort of risk factors around experiencing vicarious trauma. So like if they have issues around like perfectionism, or if they have a trauma history themselves, we kind of explore that. We talk about what would, them experiencing vicarious, what would that look like? Like, what should I be looking out for as a manager, as a supervisor, as someone who we know our staff are seeing trauma day in and day out? What are the warning signs? What do I need to be looking out for? People are either withdrawing, they're a bit snappy, they're, coming in late. There's lots of different signs that we look out for on our team. And then we check in all the time with one another about how people are doing. We provide extra funding for therapy and clinical supervision for our team. There's a lot that we can do as a sector whether or not you're at a sexual assault center or if you're just helping survivors in general, taking care of your team, I think it's like an ethical responsibility that we are caring for the people on the front lines so that they can continue to do this work for survivors.
Yeah, all of the above. We do a lot of clinical support at our center, peer support, connecting, even events like this. Although we're talking about the heavy stuff, we're also connecting and we're building our community.
Thank you.
I should have known this, but I just learned this from Jessica speaking. So can you clarify that if someone is an ally or somebody has just disclosed to them a sexual abuse, I was not aware that the crisis lines would actually help that individual. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes to everything. Yes to all of the above. Maybe I should say this now before I forget. If you take anything away from what you've learned today, I would say first and foremost, the most important thing to do if anyone discloses to you that this has happened to them, believe them. Say, I believe you. Thank you for sharing this with me. And you don't have to have all the answers of what to do next. Call the crisis line. Right? And so in Hamilton, and I'm sure in Guelph and in Waterloo too, there's lots of helping professionals, guidance counselors, nurses, police officers, et cetera, moms and dads and grandparents calling and being like, I just learned this, or so-and-so has just disclosed to me, they're sitting right beside me. We don't know what to do next. Can you talk to me? Can you talk to them? Absolutely, call and learn about what those options are and have that support for yourself as well as for the survivor.
I don't know about the other two centers, but at our center, we also provide free counseling for the supporter of survivors. And so either human trafficking survivors or sexual violence support survivors, folks who are supporting those people, we do offer free counseling sessions for those people if they've been, like if it's re-triggered something for them, if their loved ones, you know, in the throes of human trafficking, that can be really difficult if it's your child. Like we support a lot of those parents with free counseling as well. So there is this community of support. We are highly under-resourced, we are underfunded, we do need our community support to keep our doors open, but we are there. And our support lines are all available 24/7.
Yeah, we also provide support to families because we know that sexual violence does not just impact the individual. The ripple impacts are far-reaching, and it impacts partners, it impacts friends, extended family, the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
We cannot afford to do that, unfortunately, in Hamilton, but we will refer you to other sexual assault centers that have the capacity for that, because the truth is, as was mentioned, we are severely underfunded and under-resourced, but we do the best that we can with what we have. And so being creative about how to have folks access those supports too. So community support is greatly appreciated and much needed.
Hi. So I know we heard a lot about like sexual assault, sexual violence perpetrated by adults with minors. However, I have learned of, a few cases of adults, I guess, kind of telling their story about other children sexually assaulting them as children. And that's not something we hear a lot about, or that, I guess, there's not a big lens on it, or a lot of stats on that. And so do you all provide support for people who've experienced that? And I know I did hear from Lyndsey that like anybody can call you guys, but do you work with people outside of your catchment, so outside of Waterloo, Hamilton? I know, Jessica, you said that you'll refer, which is great, but do you guys take referrals from people who are all over Ontario or Canada?
So we're all members of the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers, and so There are some geographical gaps, but generally in most populated areas, there is a sexual assault center for most folks. The services that they offer range, though, depending on the resources that they have. And so often if one center doesn't offer a specific service, we will reach out to one another and we will refer. And the same thing, if a client moves, like we'll reach out and see if there's availability, and we might hold on to that person until they get through another center's waiting list. So we do try to work like as collaboratively as possible and supporting people in their own community, because community supports are critical. For folks who've experienced sexual violence from other youth, if they're over the age of 16 when they come forward, we will support them, and that does happen. We are seeing, things like sibling abuse or babysitters or experience like that sometimes will come in, but the victim must be over the age of 16 for our counseling. For human trafficking, it's over the age of 12. Most of our human trafficking clients are 12, 13, 14, very young kids. That we're supporting. But yes, we will support them. Yeah.
I've got a question. This has been a very heavy day, and it's not done yet. And a lot of us work in this sector, and we've got our own healthcare ideas and whatnot. But I would love to hear from you some strategies that we can all employ after we go home tonight. And if we are having one of those nights, what kind of strategies would you suggest?
I always say that I'm privileged to have my children because I have them, they're my priority. So I have to be okay for them to be able to go home and be mom to them. So I'm gonna take the train back to Hamilton, and on my way, before my board meeting, I'm gonna just, take a few good deep breaths and just reflect on the day and try to leave the day, everything here for now. And then if I have to revisit it, I'll revisit it tomorrow or after my kids go to bed, and maybe try to debrief with my partner. But I would say having, confidentially of course, having a circle of care and support around me is what helps me. And so I say confidentially because of course there's many things that I can't disclose to my partner or to outside community members, but there's topics that we can talk about, right? So what is it like for me to be the first racialized executive director of SASHA, right? And one of the only racialized women around the tables in Hamilton as an executive director, right? So having other racialized women who I can lean on for that kind of support too, right? Going back to my colleagues, I'm actually getting text messages from my colleagues right now, and they're saying, how's it going? Do you need any help? Do you need any debrief? Do you need any support? So having that community of care in the workplace is essential for me as well.
I think there's a quote that I go back to a lot, that action is the antidote to despair. And so like today was very heavy, and we're facing a lot of systemic injustices, especially like highlighted around like the criminal justice system specifically. And I think, there are actions we can take. There is a lot going on politically, and I know we have our local MPP here, but there's a lot of political actions happening around, this is the 14 days of action against gender-based violence is this week and next week. We have December 6th coming up. There's likely a vigil in your community honoring that event. There's lots of ways that you can get involved and actually make change and affect change. We have, there's calls, I think yesterday and today, for declaring intimate partner violence and gender-based violence an epidemic. You can reach out to your local MPPs and also like to the media. It seems like the media is a great, opportunity for us to be taking advantage of more and supporting those journalists, encouraging them. So just like thinking of one thing that you can do to sort of feel like you are, making that ripple effect. Yeah.
Something that I often talk to folks about, and for myself, is that present moment awareness, right? I'm gonna walk out of here and I'm gonna feel the cold air on my skin. I'm just gonna let that sink in. I'm gonna watch my feet as I'm walking, kind of grounded to the earth, kind of trying to focus as much as I can on the here and now. But another thing too is find those moments of hope, right? We've talked about a lot of heavy things, but it's also very hopeful, and always trying to find that hope. It's out there and we just need to find it.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, well, thank you for, oh, there is, sorry. Missed it.
Now the pressure's on.
It better be a good one.
I provide legal support to survivors of human trafficking, and I'm a huge fan of sex assault centers across the province. You guys are doing such amazing work, and I'm glad that there's a spotlight on the work that you guys do. Now I want to kind of put you on the spot a bit to hear if you would share about, who else you find in your communities is really, advocating and supporting survivors, so that, just an illustration, just to give us a sense of what else is out there.
In Ontario, all municipalities are mandated to have the Violence Against Women Coordinating Committees. And so in Hamilton, it's called the Women Abuse Working Group, of which I'm the co-chair right now. And I find lots of support around that table. It's a working group of more than 20 plus service providers, shelters, violence against women centers, sexual assault center, and then other organizations, including like the Immigrant Working Center, who have the vested interest in ending gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, violence against women, and sexualized violence. I think we're one of few sectors that want to work ourselves out of business, right? Because we don't want to have to exist. We want violence to end. And we know that to end sexual violence, we have to end all forms of violence and oppression. So that's where I get my hope, but also in other community organizations that and friends and allies who aren't necessarily doing violence against women, but are doing that work to end other forms of violence in our community, so that we can come to that world free of violence, of which my mission statement speaks of.
Yeah, I would say in our community, our strongest allies are our local YWCAs. They've always had our back. We also work very closely with our local transition house. We have a Planned Parenthood Shore Center that's always been a really strong ally. We also I wanted to highlight, we just also received funding from our local OHL hockey team to do training with coaches for children's hockey and things like that. So our public education program is doing a lot more work with athletes, in particular male-identified athletes, to really try to address sort of these trends and I think it came from these stories in the media, right? That did lead to, funders and, sports organizations realizing that they do have to take action and invest in this prevention work. So we do have some really great allies in our corner, but the work is still, it is still a struggle to get those headlines, to get it on the priority for government to invest in, for sure.
I would say we have great community partners in Guelph, Wellington as well. So besides the 30 community-based sexual assault centers across the province, there's also 35 sexual assault, domestic violence treatment teams at hospitals as well. So that can be a place to reach out for support. We have an action committee in Guelph as well. Community partners sit around the table and do a lot of work around that. What do we need? How do we move forward, et cetera? So building those partnerships is key.
No more questions.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to each of you.